Hi Daddy Story Manifestor, I'm so glad you're here. I'm Leah Falls, writer and actor, and today I'm sharing 6 things that I've learned since becoming a full-time creative. Let's go! First, let me give you a little bit of background info on me and my current life situation, because when I'm watching videos like this, I'm always really curious of how they got there and what their financial situation's like. Ha! Isn't it fun to live in a society deeply ingrained with capitalism? I graduated from college with a degree in acting 4 years ago and have been living as a full-time creative freelancer for 2 years now. Yay! The first 2 years after college were a bit tumultuous and complicated for me. I was an international student in San Francisco and my visa was up. And while my wifey and I were already together and married, the visa process is very long and complicated and expensive. So we ended up living in London for 2 years, which we were both very excited about. But unfortunately, audition-wise and acting-wise, it was very, very complicated. In San Francisco, I did do a good chunk of short films, I did some theater, and it was great. And my accent wasn't necessarily a big issue. It's still, for certain roles, it was a no, but in general, it wasn't an automatic no. But in London, not just my accent was a no, but the fact that I wasn't British was a no for a lot of auditions, and that was quite disheartening, especially because a lot of casting calls were looking for acting experience optional, but you have to be British or you have to 100% sound British, and I'm not great with accents. It's probably my weakest spot in terms of acting skills. So I didn't get any auditions. And the few auditions I did get didn't go well.
I had an audition for an unpaid community theatre project, and I waited 3 hours to then be the reader for another person's audition, and when I started mine, they stopped me because they didn't want to anymore.
In my 1.5 years, 2 years in London, I got one role and I ended up turning it down because they wanted me to spend more than £100 in travel all by myself and organize it completely out of London and stuff, and it wasn't paid. So I was kind of like, you know what, I'm a professional actor, I have a full degree, I studied this, I've been on professional sets, and I'm not going to pay to do your free student project. So yeah, it was a very disheartening and complicated time for me. As I already mentioned, getting the visa was super expensive, which is not great for accessibility and general fairness of, society, but that's a different subject. And my wifey had some of her own visa issues in England, which shouldn't have happened, but somehow did happen because immigration. My cat Victor got really sick. He's fine now, but he needed emergency surgery, and living in London was very hefty. Funny enough, heftier and less easy to afford than New York and San Francisco, which we did not anticipate. So I ended up working a corporate job for 1.5 years, and the people there were really wonderful, but it was just very unhealthy for me. And during that time, during working in my corporate job, I discovered writing. I had been writing my whole life. I'd written plays and short stories. I'd started novels before. I'd written short films. And right out of college, I was starting to write a screenplay, which can now very much be shelved and has been shelved under the
Not my story to tell
category. So I had been writing in the past, but during that time I got the idea, it's a long story, I talk about that some other time, for Goddess of Limbo, for my debut novel, which will be coming out in August this year. And I really, really fell in love with it. And especially during that time when I was so fed up with the very low level auditions I was getting and the quality of the scripts and the quality of the effort put into it by the people who were creating it, I really, really was longing to tell my own stories. And writing became an absolute love for me. So I realized during that time that I wanted that to be one of my main pursuits. I want to continue acting and I want to be an author as well.
And trying to do both only occasionally gives me panic attacks.
During that time at my corporate job, I also got really sick. And I have a good chunk of chronic health issues that I'm dealing with, and they were getting really bad during that job time because I couldn't really take care of myself, and everything was really overwhelming. One of the main struggles, and I've talked about that before here, are my chronic migraines. And when you have a job where you're required to look at a screen 8 hours a day, if you have a migraine day, you can take maybe one day off occasionally, but I, in bad times, have about 9 to 10 migraine days a month. Actually, it's more of an average thing. And it was just really hard because you just got to grit your teeth and keep pushing and keep looking at the screens. And I'm very, very photosensitive, so it was just really difficult. At the same time, my wife was discovering that the complete freelance creative lifestyle was not for her yet. It very much overwhelmed her. She craved more structure, and when she got an office job, it was actually really good for her. So we decided that when we were going to move back to the US, she would be the one with a full-time job pursuing creative things on the side, and I would be either doing part-time job or full-time creative. And that's what we ended up with. It was a difficult decision to make that I still sometimes struggle with, because I sometimes struggle with putting myself into other people's heads and perspectives and understanding that, it's funny to say as a writer and actor, but yeah, and non-fictional ones, and understanding that their idea of a good life is different from mine. So I see that she's really happy with a full-time job, but it took me a really long time to accept that. And this is a huge blessing for me, and I'm so freaking grateful for the life that I have now and for the life that I get to live. But I do want to say that to a certain extent, with my health issues, it's also necessary. And I want to say here that because of where we are in disability care and in general how society takes care of people, this is not an option for everyone, but it definitely should be. I really, really need the flexibility of knowing when I can work and how much. Similar to with the screens, I love this channel and I love uploading videos, but I have not been able to upload at one day each week, just simply because I cannot anticipate when the migraines are there, and the editing takes a really long time at the screen, so that's not always in my hands. And with a full-time job or even a part-time job that's 20 hours a week on the screen, it would be very difficult for me, not in terms of it just being hard on my mental health, but just genuinely on my physical health. Because of the chronic migraines, it's really great now for me to say, okay, today I'm just working in a notebook, and I'm hoping that I can get a free write soon. So basically an electronic typewriter with no screens, and that will be a huge improvement to my life. And also I get sick a lot, so I need a lot of rest health-wise. I don't want to go too far into all of this, but I just want to say that the flexibility of the full-time creative life and of the freelancing life is both a blessing and necessary. Anyway, so the past 2 years I've been living as a freelancer. My wife has financially supported me, and I'm getting a little bit of income from my work. Though what we pay artists and what my rent costs doesn't quite match up. And my landlord has yet to take exposure as payment, and I don't know, we should get on that. I do want to say though, if you're desperate to go full-time with your passion work and don't have anybody to support you, don't give up. Keep your eyes out for opportunities, work on your personal money mindset. That's right, I bash capitalism and I encourage each one of us to see money as a positive thing. I am complicated like that. And stay committed to the life you want. When we first moved to New York City, I actually got an acting gig that ended up supporting us until the pandemic hit really well. It was definitely a lucky draw, but I was also looking and I was open to all these opportunities. And in the end, my wife was able to work the job with me and then take over most of it for a while. And it was also a huge blessing, but it did support us. So while I think it's easy to watch these videos and think, oh, they just got lucky, I understand that to a certain extent, yes. I want you to know that you can get lucky too, as long as you keep staying committed to that life that you truly do want. And while I was in the middle of that corporate job, it really did not seem possible. And it didn't seem possible to get an acting job that would support me financially, but it is possible. We just got to keep believing in it. And yes, it should be easier. especially when we're talking about health issues and stuff, it should absolutely be easier for you to be an artist full-time and be supported by the world for all the beautiful things that you put out there. And it is possible. Just keep believing in it. This is going on a bigger thing. And this is sort of, I guess, other lessons too, but it's part of the background that I want to talk about. I do want to say about mindset real quick that telling yourself that things aren't possible and that it's just so hard to be an artist and you got to be a starving artist and there's nothing to support you there. I understand why it's very easy to believe that with the circumstances, but it will do so much bad for your mental health. I really fell into that in the first couple of years after college, and it was really hard. So I very much appeal to you to work on that and to do believe in opportunities, because it will help you in the long run. But now let's talk about 6 other things I've learned since working as a free-time creative freelancer. Free time? Full-time. Number 1, you gotta take yourself seriously. Writing and publishing a book, establishing an author platform, a writing career, establishing any kind of creative career is a full-time job. And the only one who will doubt that is you. And capitalistic expectations. Wow, this is totally turning into a bashing capitalism video, but welcome for the ride. Here's the thing, you probably won't make any money in the beginning. When I wrote the second draft of my novel, Goddess of Limbo, I spent about 6 to 8 hours at least on a desk every single day working on it, and pretty much 24 hours in my mind. And during those month of work, of like no weekends, no vacation days, I didn't earn anything of it. In fact, I spent a lot of money. It was pre-COVID and I was going into the city a lot because I really needed that kind of energy and buzz for my creative headspace, and theoretically, I still do, but I guess I'm a hermit now. So I spent money on transportation, on coffees, on that kind of stuff. And it's really hard to justify that I needed it, but I needed it. It was my job. And even though I clearly worked, I didn't get the validation of a paycheck. No one checked in with me and told me how I was doing or if I was performing well or anything. And that's not only scary, it also comes with a lot of doubts. But here's the thing, if you want to create something big, if you want to publish a book, you gotta take yourself seriously. You gotta validate yourself because you're your own boss. You're the one that's keeping you on track. And yes, supportive friends and family can be really helpful here, but that kind of validation is fleeting. You're the one who shows up every day. And if you don't take that seriously as a job, it's gonna get so much harder. Ultimately, you need to hold on to your vision of success and believe that you're working towards it. One of my affirmations, and yes, this may seem completely unrealistic, but a grand goal really motivates me, so that's what works for me, is I make $500 an hour as a writer and I receive my paycheck in divine timing. So basically what I'm saying here is I'm not working for free, I'm working in advance. And you can take a way smaller number if you find that more motivating. I'm not expecting to make $1 million of my debut novel. This is more of a, in the future grand scale vision. But find something that motivates you and that secures you, that you can repeat to yourself, that you can really foster a belief in, that tells you that you are already working for something. You're already getting paid. You're already getting validation. It's just in advance. You just haven't quite received it yet, but you know it's coming for the work that you're currently doing. Another thing I learned about validation is to give myself really generous goals. Give yourself goals that are easy to reach so you can give a lot of cheering, a lot of celebration for yourself. If it's a 10-minute writing sprint, yes, hooray, you did it. Every sentence, if you wanna give yourself little goals of I wrote 3 sentences, celebrate that, because you need that kind of validation, you need that celebration, you need to find little things that make you feel good about yourself in the process, because otherwise you are just alone against those doubts, and those doubts will try to win, and they can if you are not believing that you're making progress and if you're not believing in the little steps that you can celebrate on the way there. Especially coming from a corporate setting, you need to talk to yourself in a positive way, because otherwise there's no feedback, and that's sort of a bad sign. At least for me, it freaked me out when I didn't get any feedback. So that can really increase your doubts. So do talk to yourself, practice really good self-talk. And this is where you have to kind of strike the balance between giving yourself tons of validation and taking yourself seriously in a disciplined manner. This is what taking myself seriously looked for me pre-pandemic. I commuted to my workplace every day. I worked during office-esque hours, regular office hours. I took breaks. I very much treated it like an office job. And yes, I could have stayed from home and worked there, but I needed this feeling, I needed the transition definitely from the corporate job and having the same hours to see, look, I am absolutely working. This is not just, I'm not just at home relaxing and then doing something on the side. And now during the pandemic, I schedule most days in my planner. I get dressed. When I feel healthy, I put makeup on. I invested in my website, and I'm investing in little things in my long-term career. And when I'm in the mood for it, I sometimes put background music that's a cafe or an office setting on, just anything to kind of immerse me in that feeling. And those steps, that's just what works for me. But find the steps that you need to make it feel like a job in a good way, but still make it feel like this is your actual profession. This is not just a vacation. And pre and during pandemic, both times I talked about it as my job, and I can't allow myself to think of it as anything else, because then I start feeling unemployed and kind of stupid about what I'm doing, and my goals seem completely unreachable. No, I need to keep seeing it and describing it and talking to people about it as my job. I chose to believe in my dream. I chose to pursue this, so I have to commit myself to it wholeheartedly. And while the last couple of months were a special kind of tumultuous, I usually write every day, and unless I'm too sick or it's a vacation day, I start taking them now. I do sometimes. I do at least one thing that furthers me on my career. It's really important to stay disciplined like that. When I first started, I watched a lot of Jenna Morassi videos. I still like watching her sometimes, her channel. Someone leave. And she talks a lot about how she doesn't need any special motivation to write because it's her job. And with any other job, if you just don't show up or don't do any of the work, you lose the job. And I'm not saying you should, constantly fear of losing the job, but you need to treat it in the same way. It's not now I'm struck with inspiration. No, your job is to be a writer or whatever creative project you're pursuing, so you sit down and you work on it. I really take that to heart, and now I do need to learn how to take weekends. I'm sort of getting better at it. It's kind of difficult for me because of sicknesses and sick days. It's hard to feel like those are not taking weekends, because they're not, because they don't actually recharge you, but it's a little bit hard mentally. I'm working on that. But in general, that kind of discipline and holding yourself accountable like that is super important for taking yourself seriously, for seeing it as a job, and for ultimately believing in your long-term goals. At the same time, setting yourself way too high of expectation and critting, not one. At the same time, being hard on yourself, setting way too high expectations, and constantly criticizing yourself won't do either. This is far too long of a game to only sustain yourself on long-term vision. You have to enjoy it every day. And I really believe that this is the difference between I liked it as a hobby, but now I hate it as a job. You gotta keep the fun in that as well, and you keep that by being really nice to yourself and often taking a moment to reflect on what you're actually doing and not just get caught up in those goals. When I have a longer writing session, I usually make one of the goals enjoy yourself, because that reminds me to then during writing actually pause and be like, hey, I'm telling a story. It's fun. It's a fun, simple thing. Yeah, it gets hard sometimes. Yeah, there's expectations. But at the moment, I am just writing a first draft, no other expectations. And stuff like that really keeps you going and keeps it enjoyable during every day. So it's important to find the balance there. And I do kind of believe that both of those aspects of the balance are part of taking yourself seriously. Number 2, long-term vision over short-term gratification. Writing a book or any kind of long-term project like that has always been difficult, but nowadays it's even trickier because our brains are constantly primed on instant gratification. It's tempting to share every bit that you create with everyone, but from my experience, that can do a lot of more harm than good. You only get to introduce your project once, and though your friends will probably take into account that this is just the first draft, that impression will still have been made, and it just won't feel the same when you introduce it again. It robs that person from experiencing it in the way that you eventually intended to be experienced. And it's not about that person, but we as artists internalize the reactions to our work, and we're going to internalize the early version reactions instead of our finished product. If most of the impressions I got from readers came to my first draft, that probably would have really messed with my confidence for this project. And you also don't want to interrupt your own creative process, because right at the beginning, you are telling that story to yourself. You're still figuring out what the story is. And if you get a lot of input externally on what that story is, you might not actually, tell the story you wanted to tell in the first place. So to me personally, I wouldn't want to share my first draft with a lot of people, even though while writing it, I really did. Don't get me wrong, some feedback is vital in the early development stages. I definitely think second to third draft beta readers are a really good idea, but in the very beginning, when you're just sitting down and just starting to create, I suggest you have 1 to 3 confidants that you share things with. I share everything with my wife, every little piece I write. At the end of the day, I will present to her, and I really need that validation, and I really need that to motivate me to keep going. So that's really helpful. I tried to write a book once and not share anything with her, and the motivation really went down. But the thing is, during that time, you need really excited, enthused motivation, because if you get criticism during that time, you're already so much in doubt in those early stages that it can completely derail you, at least for me personally. Don't release all your storytelling magic into the world until you get the chance to develop it into your kind of magic, your final magic and version, or a version that you're really comfortable with. Another problem with short-term gratification is that there are so many opportunities to get validation, even from writing, quicker than writing a novel. There are tons of writing contests. You can share your work online while building your author platform, or you can write for other people. And while all of that can be great for building your career, if you do too much of it, it can lure you away from your novel, especially if there's money involved. Writing a novel takes years, and it's difficult to hold on to that vision of in those years, in a few years, people actually holding your final product. It is much more tempting to do small gigs instead. I get it. And once again, I'm not blaming anyone for that, but it's super important to choose your long-term project over those short-term gratifications very frequently, because otherwise the long-term one just won't feel worth it anymore. Track your progress, celebrate it, and make sure it stays a priority. Number 3, you can enjoy it and it can still be work. Coming from the corporate world or a different full-time position can make it very easy to fall into the trap of not valuing your work, especially in our culture's emphasis on hustle and living the dream. Despite my health issues, I felt and still feel so lucky to be living my dream, to be working on my book full-time, that I worked myself to the ground. I worked so hard and I totally burned myself out, but I didn't understand why, because I didn't value it as work. I was just like, I'm just doing the thing that I said I loved every day, so why am I not feeling refreshed? Well, even if you love something, if you do it every day and put everything you have into it, it is hard work. In our society, we've totally accepted the whole work sucks attitude. And that's a really terrible mindset, but that's a different story. But when it doesn't suck, it's very easy to dismiss it. I've learned to give myself credit for my work. Just because I enjoy it, just because it lights me up, doesn't mean that it also exhausts me sometimes or that it's easy. I get exhausted. I have days in which I don't want to do anything, and that's allowed. I have days in which I don't want to sit down and write, and that's allowed. Now, I probably will still try and write on those days, but because previous point, But it's okay if you're not burning for it every day. Gosh, I need to hear that to myself right now. It's a really good reminder because I'm publishing my book and that's a dream come true, but it's also so much work. And at the moment, I'm just like, no, I don't want to set up publishing accounts, but it is part of the dream. It just won't feel like the dream every single day, and that's okay. When you set your own hours and determine your own goals, it is really important that you also set your own boundaries with your work. That balance is actually really important for stamina too. When I was first focusing on my book, I gave so much of it that I knew this wouldn't be feasible long term. So naturally, I wasn't picturing myself doing it long term. So I was living in constant fear and scarcity of it being taken away because it felt like a super sprint that I can currently do, but I won't always do, so And this is especially true if the life that you previously lived was really hard, which it was for me. So it felt like I was still sort of escaping it. And if I stopped running, then it would come back, but at the same time, I can't run forever, so it's a lot of stress you're putting on yourself. I felt like I needed to get to the point where I made it, or else I would lose the life that I enjoyed. But the problem is that fear makes it actually really hard to enjoy it. So you're not living the life that you're saying you enjoy. All that changed for me when I didn't get the agent that I wanted to get and slowed down, because then I realized that if I wanted to keep this freelance life, I needed to make it a life that I actually enjoy and that is sustainable for me long term. And as silly as it seems, sometimes creating marketing mood boards for 5 hours is work. Sometimes spending 3 hours to write 1 page is work. Sometimes spending a whole day just shuffling notes around is work. There are enough people that won't believe that what you're doing is real work, so don't be one of them. Give yourself the credit. Also, as a freelance artist, I'm basically running my own business, which means there's a lot of decisions to make, a lot of things to keep track of, a lot of mental energy that is constantly being involved in there. And that's not really trackable, but it is mentally draining over time. So basically what I'm saying is, yes, you deserve that day off. Trust me. Number 4, time management and productivity are allowed to fluctuate. This is a hard one for me. I really wish at this point I had a clear-cut criteria that would tell me how well I'm doing and how successful I am. It doesn't work like that. I spent several months writing 3,000 to 5,000 days of work.
What? No, what?
I spent several months writing 3,000 to 500. I spent several months writing 3,000 to 5,000 words a day.
Did someone say burnout?
I spent several months writing 500 words a day and considering that well done. Currently, I'm not writing most days. Why? Because publishing, marketing, and platform building are all part of the job, and they're a lot to juggle right now. For a while, I woke up at 5 to 6 a.m. and started writing right away. For a while, I didn't start until noon. What I'm trying to say is there's no easy way to measure your success. If you're a freelancer with a dependable, somewhat reliable work schedule, it might be different. But if you're a creative freelancer, embrace the chaos. Time management skills can be super helpful, and creating a structure is also important in tracking your goals well. But at least in my personal experience, it will fluctuate. The effectiveness will fluctuate. You just can't plan your life in that super straightforward way as you could with a corporate job. And yes, my health issues definitely factor into this one, but even without it, I just don't think it's very clear cut. Especially when you're doing a big creative project, you won't know what your novel needs at the moment. Forgive yourself for chaos. Don't measure your success solely by productivity. Measure it by growth, measure it by showing up, measure it by the progress you have made long term, measure it for the things that you've learned. Measure it by your commitment, measure it by the risks you take. All of those things are so much more important than a specific daily work count. And if you're not in the same place as you were 6 months ago, that's not a bad thing, even if you were more productive back then. You've still learned so much in that time, and as long as you're continuing to make progress and keeping on to that, holding on to that long-term vision, you really can't go wrong here. I write much slower than I did back then, but I think the quality is higher nowadays. So in the long run, it might not actually make that big of a difference that you currently think it does. Allow fluctuations, allow changes. As long as you're moving forward, you're doing great. I think that's a good lesson for life in general. Number 5, learn as you go. There's so much great information on the internet, so much to learn, and you might think that if you take it all in, you will know how to do the whole thing. You will know everything you need to know. You won't. I did extensive research on writing, on publishing, on building an author platform, but just because I knew all of that theoretically did not mean I knew how to implement it, how to incorporate it into my daily life, or even how to get started. A lot of trial and error followed, and I'm anticipating much more of that in the future. I used to think that if I'm prepared enough, if I study enough, I could skip ahead on a learning curve. But really, failing forward is just sort of the best way to improve. I don't actually know how to do things until I'm actively doing them. And really stressing yourself out in learning how to do them before you start doing it will just slow you down or even stop you from starting. I wanted to create my YouTube channel over a year before I actually started. I wanted to be sure that I had it all figured out. Well, I still don't have it figured out. I'm still trying to figure out how to improve my audio quality. This is a new mic today. Let's see how it works. I'm still pivoting and adjusting my direction to make it long-term sustainable. Same thing happened with TikTok. I wanted to start a TikTok account last year, but I didn't because I had no idea how to do it. Well, I just sat down and I learned it in one day, and now I'm doing it. I have tons of information and knowledge on the self-publishing process, and yeah, I have a plan too, but really I'm just taking it one step at a time right now. Yes, research is important, studying is important, but don't let it stop you, hold you back, or slow you down too much. You will never be perfectly prepared, and that's not an issue unless you make it one. I tried a ton of things last year. I started a podcast. I offered recorded meditations. I offered creative coaching services for a while, and I discovered that none of those things were for me, and that's fine because I learned so much in the process of all of it. It's really tempting for me to go, oh, you should have started the author platform you're currently running a couple of years ago, but I don't let myself entertain those thoughts for long because it's not fair to the Leah from a few years ago. She was just trying to figure things out, and everything she did back then got me to this point. So it's really important to not judge our past selves here and just go with how our personal growth curve is going. That was a great sentence. As long as you're taking active steps, as long as you try things, you are building your future right now. You're on the right path. You don't need to have it all figured out right now. And if you feel like you do, be open to be proven wrong. The process is the real school here. This brings me perfectly to the next point. Number 6, befriend uncertainty. I know it's a hard sell. I know it's super scary. We're wired to fear uncertainty. We're wired to be very hesitant and scared of what we don't know. Trust me, I get it. I literally cannot function without some structure. It's not pretty. But uncertainty is a major part of creative freelancing, so you might as well turn it into a good thing. Or at least not hell. This is where it's so important to develop trust in your long-term vision, in the person that's getting you there, future you. Trust future you. And if you're open for it in the universe or whatever you believe in. You gotta feed your brain over and over again that uncertainty means endless wonderful possibilities and opportunities. Every possible success lies in uncertainty. Uncertainty is full of abundance. And yes, it's also full of negative potential, but this is where mindset becomes very important. Look back at all the situations that seemed hopeless in the past, that you didn't feel like you could survive. You're here now. You made it through them. Hopeless is a fear-based concept that we made up. No matter what happens, you can carry yourself out of it. Trust yourself. You will make it through. Adapting those beliefs takes time and is hard work, but I found them vital for a less anxious, creative freelancing life. We've discussed in the last point that no matter where you're going, you're on the right path. Hold on to that and hold on to your long-term vision and to the belief that you will get there, because if you have those in you, uncertainty actually becomes a good thing. That's where your visions are coming to life, in that dark space of uncertainty. One of my affirmations right now is great things are happening, and it's been really helpful for me in the last couple months, especially with the job search and with the existential dread that we dealt with. It was very much like, no, great things are happening. This is for good. There's a good light at the end of it. And yes, there's uncertainty now, but I embraced that uncertainty to a certain extent. It was difficult, of course, but I tried my best to hold on to it. And lo and behold, so that uncertainty light a better path for us. I'm not saying that there won't be disappointments, but they're much easier to deal with if you feel like you are on the right path and that they are just part of failing forward. My trick for embracing uncertainty is to create certainties for yourselves. Those are partially things that you can actively control and that are actually in your power, and partially those long-term visions. I keep saying long-term visions, but your dreams, your visions that you're deciding to believe in. So certainties I control, no matter what, I will keep creating. I will continue to tell stories. I will do something creative every day. Those are my certainties that I can control. And even if I lose everything, I will still be able to do that. I'm also learning every day. I'm improving my craft and my intuitive creativity every day. I'm growing every day as a person. And beliefs I'm choosing, I believe that I will be a successful writer and actor, that I will be well respected, well known, and wealthy enough to support my family and people and organizations that I really want to support. Those are certainties that I choose, are certainties for myself. Do I believe in them 100% of the time? No, absolutely not. Do I believe in them every day? No, but I practice believing them every day, and that makes a difference. Quick disclaimer, those certainties are here to help you enjoy and relax into your present life and believe that good things are coming. If you start only focusing on them and only focusing on those certainties that you have to make them work, you're once again just living in uncertainty and in an unhealthy way. So those are things that let you have the certainty to enjoy where you're at on the journey. This is just my personal way of embracing uncertainty. Find your own way, find what works for you. It doesn't have to work 100% of the time. It doesn't even have to work 70% of the time. But make befriending uncertainty a priority for you and finding ways to do so a priority for you, because it will greatly reduce stress. That's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Comment down below what your certainties are, how you deal with uncertainty, what your experiences with creative living are, and of course, any questions you may have. I'd be super grateful if you could like, subscribe, and ring that bell to give me a boost for the YouTube algorithm. My new newsletter is also running now. It's on my website, leahfalls.com. Called my Storytelling Nook, and there'll be exclusive fiction pieces, writing, lifestyle, behind the scenes updates, and other fun stuff. So we'll have a good time there. Go subscribe. Check out my social media links in the description as well. As I mentioned, I now have a TikTok. Yeah, wonderful. Have a wonderful week. Thank you all for being here, and I'll see you next time. Bye! Goodbye, kitty cat. I shall miss you.